Chapter 11. A Monster at Yumi's House. You've already been here? Ulrich asked. Yes, several times. Perfect, because I've never stepped foot here. What are we doing? I'd say breakfast first, Yumi proposed. Then afterwards we take the metro to find this road. What was it called again? Rue Camille Lemonnier. Perfect. They piled onto the bench in the station bistro and had 2 delicious croissants. Then they embarked on the metro after having carefully studied the timetable. 2 changeovers. Yellow line, then green line. While they were trying to get a grip on the map, Ulrich almost lost sight of Yumi, pushed by a crowd of businessmen vigorously fighting their way along the platform. He grabbed her by an arm and breathed. This whole place is crazy. Completely crazy. It's normal, his friend responded. This is currently the headquarters of the European Commission. After finishing their voyage, squashed together like sardines, the 2 friends walked hand in hand down the large city roads. The crowd seemed to have dispersed and they could finally breathe the quiet and serene air, up to the point that Ulrich almost forgot that they were making this trip to help Aelita. It was like a holiday for him and Yumi, just the 2 of them in a splendid city. Could he ever ask for more? Rue Lemonnier was an ordinary road with wide footpaths lined with trees and beautiful buildings. The building they were looking for dated back to before the war, with a white broken facade and high windows, and on the side there was an intercom with several doorbells. What name is written on the paper? Yumi asked. Madame Lassalle. Madame Lassalle, Ulrich responded. She could be a friend of Professor Hertz. Lassalle, there it is! Yumi exclaimed when she spotted the name on the intercom. Let's ring it! No response. The young girl rang again. Still no response. Try another doorbell, Ulrich proposed. They tried all of them in vain. What bad luck, Yumi muttered. Hey, you guys! A voice called to them. They turned around. A small old man with a funny hat came towards them, pushing an old red bicycle. Sorry, Yumi asked him. Are you talking to us? Yes, responded the man while taking tiny steps up to the intercom. It's useless to ring. Nobody will respond. Why is that? Ulrich wondered while looking at the long list of names. All these people live here, don't they? We're looking for this lady, Madame Lassalle. Young man, the old man smiled, I've lived on this road since 1936. I saw Rue Lemonnier be bombed and reduced to cinders during the war, and I can say with complete certainty that nobody has ever lived in this building. It belonged to the government before. Then, after the war, it was bought by an American company. But nobody has ever come to live or even work here, except for a few short weeks. But a property like this must be worth a fortune, Yumi cried, stupefied. You can say that, young lady, but... The old man's voice dropped in pitch and confided. In my opinion, it wasn't a company that bought it, but rather the Secret Service, as far as I know, at least. The Secret Service? Ulrich repeated, not able to believe his ears. I know. You're undoubtedly thinking of James Bond or some other agent like that, but I'm telling you kids that the Secret Service really exists, and believe me, they were bustling with activity during the war. Thank you for coming to talk to us, sir, Yumi responded, smiling. No problem at all. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to someone now and then. Ulrich laughed as he watched the old man leave. That poor man was a little shaken, wasn't he? Maybe, but in any case he was right. Nobody responded. So what do we do now? The Café au Lait was a modern cafe, with a skinny black counter and some small tables. Aelita arrived slightly late and found Richard already seated, his palm computer on the table next to a cup of hot tea. He seemed wiped out. Have you been waiting long? She asked. I had a few problems leaving Caddick. Don't worry, he responded with a smile. Are you having anything to drink? Aelita ordered a hot chocolate and sat next to Richard, in a way that allowed her to see the screen of his palm computer. It still showed the famous Hoppix codes. Were they the same ones they found in Professor Hertz's dossier? Or were they part of the same program? She had to remember to ask Jeremy about it. While she was concentrating on the screen, Richard stared at her. Then he put his hand on hers and said, Can I ask why you wanted to see me? I thought it was the least I could do, she justified. After all, the other night must have been a real shock for you. I mean, you were expecting to find a girl about your age? Instead of that... I still can't believe that you're her, the Aelita that I knew, I mean. You're certainly identical, but... No, it's impossible, he continued in a lower voice. We all grow up. I've gone mad. Aelita squeezed the young man's fingers. You're right, Richard. I really am Aelita, but I haven't grown up. I'd love to tell you everything, but I'm still not sure if I can fully trust you. I just ask you to understand. I'm scared. The moment had come to explain to Richard why she had come to see him. During the Christmas holidays, for reasons she hadn't yet understood, Aelita had a bout of amnesia and all her memories of the Yoko had disappeared. Jeremy and the others had patiently helped her recover the memories thanks to a video diary in which they recounted everything that happened since the young student had discovered the abandoned factory. But before that, the girl had no memory of the period in which she lived in the Hermitage with her father or was in the same class as Richard at Caddick Academy. She didn't even remember the face of her mother and Thea. Richard, however, could give her a hand in that area. The young man was happy to tell her everything. He started by talking about their class and teachers. Aelita and Richard were the best of friends, like she was now with Jeremy. But the young man reminded her of a number of details. The long afternoons Hopper spent helping them with their homework in the large lounge room in the Hermitage, school excursions, their love of life. "Back then, you were a really weird girl," Richard said. "Sometimes you'd disappear for entire afternoons with no explanation. You told me that you were working with your father, but that it was a top-secret project and you couldn't tell anyone about it, not even me. And then, during the last year of school that we spent together, you started to visit a new friend. You called him Mr. X. You said that he was very kind and very lonely, and that you had to help him discover his purpose in the world. When you talked about him, your eyes would shine. I was crazy in love with you myself and very jealous. I imagined that this Mr. X was a young foreigner that you had completely fallen in love with. And you had much less time to play with me. And then your visits to Mr. X became more and more frequent, and for some time your father stopped coming to classes, and so did you. Up to the point where, one sad day, you disappeared. We had a history test and we had studied together. I was waiting for you, but you never came. That afternoon, I ran to the Hermitage, but I found the doors and windows locked. Then I never saw you again. Never again. Until the other night." It was June 6, 1994, the day when Hopper had finished his work on the Lyoko project and fled into the virtual world, taking his daughter with him. And he shut the supercomputer down, making it remain inactive for several years until Jeremy's arrival. Aelita regarded Richard, whose eyes became clouded. On his palm computer screen, the Hopix codes were still streaming. Someone had set them off like an alarm signal to guide Richard to the Hermitage to help them. Her father thought that Richard was the right person to look after her in difficult moments. Aelita agreed completely and guessed that she could trust him. She began to speak to him about Lyoko. Hiroki Ishiyama had been awake for 2 hours. He was lying down in his room watching a cartoon on television for the umpteenth time. He now knew it by heart. During the week, his sister Yumi spent all her days at school, but on the weekdays they were usually alone. During the week, his sister Yumi spent all her days at school, but on the weekends they were usually together and she played with him. But today he was all alone. His parents were sleeping in, and Kiwi, since he was injured, slept from morning till night. Hiroki was bored. Suddenly, the little boy heard the dog bark downstairs. He seemed angry. Several seconds later, Hiroki raised his head because the growls became louder, almost terrorized. The dog's barking increased. Then nothing. Hiroki leapt up and approached his bedroom door, still closed. The house was quiet, maybe a little too quiet. He opened the door without making a noise and stayed behind it, ears open. There were footsteps, then a noise of heavy shoes on the staircase. It wasn't his parents. They had their shoes off. Nobody could enter a Japanese house with shoes on their feet, except for a burglar. Hiroki held his breath and didn't move a muscle. The footsteps continued up the stairs, and the stranger walked along the hallway, passing by Yumi's room as well as his, and then headed to their parents' room. The young boy heard a voice saying, "Oh, but you don't remember me?" Hiroki heard his mother let out a small, frightened cry, then nothing. Distraught, he exited his room, and down the hall he saw a tall silhouette wrapped in a coat. Electric wires ran down his long, gloved fingers, relayed to Hiroki's parents' heads. The poor adults were still in their pajamas and seemed unconscious. Hiroki didn't know if it was a man or a monster, but either way he was too small to confront him alone. He needed help. He discreetly headed to the staircase. In the living room, Kiwi was unmoving in his basket, but still breathing. The mysterious man had made him go to sleep. Yumi's brother slipped his shoes on, grabbed the small dog, then fled. But who could he call? And who would help him? Odd had just hung up the phone. His mother had called him to say that his father was doing better. He had now been discharged from the hospital and had come home. He had just gone back to bed when he heard knocking at his door. It was Yumi's little brother. He was holding Kiwi in his arms and seemed terrified. "Hiroki!" Odd cried while the dog licked his face. "What are you doing here? Hey, you shouldn't have brought him here. And Jim?" he said, scrutinizing the hallway. Luckily, nobody was around. Hiroki jumped from one foot to the other. Then in a desperate voice he said, "Odd! I need help! A monster took my parents!" "Speak more quietly," Odd replied, "and explain to me what happened." The little boy managed to babble out somewhat of an explanation. Odd contemplated the story. Yumi's brother wasn't the kind of person to invent such crazy stories, and what he recounted seemed strangely like what happened to his own father earlier. "Let's go find Jeremy and we'll run over to your place," Odd proposed. "But I want to see my sister," the child protested. "Where is she?" "It's a long story, Hiroki. Just trust me and come on." The little genius was in his room, concentrating on Waldo Schaefer's dossier. Odd and Hiroki burst in, and Odd summarized the situation in 2 words. While the boys headed down the hallway once more, Jeremy's phone rang. It was Ulrich calling from Brussels. "What did Jeremy say?" Yumi asked once the conversation had ended. "He suggested we take some photos of the lock and send them to him," Ulrich responded. "This afternoon or tonight. He'll explain what tools we need to buy and how to pick the lock." "Pick it?" the young girl protested. "But that's illegal. This time we're risking ending up in prison for good. If it really is a building belonging to secret agents, you'd have to think that there are cameras and microphones hidden in it. And," Ulrich interrupted, smiling, "and especially, that means we'll have to stay the night here. And I don't believe that minors can book a hotel room." "That's not a problem," Yumi responded. "I already told you that I often come to Brussels. A friend of my mother lives here, a very nice woman. I'm sure that she'll welcome us and won't say anything to my parents." "That's perfect then," Ulrich cried. "So we'll take a couple of photos of this lock. Then we'll make the most of our day." This agenda seemed to please the 2 adventuring teens. Arriving at his house, Hiroki slowly put the key into the lock and signaled to Odd and Jeremy not to talk. The students followed him, taking their shoes off. Hiroki then silently placed Kiwi on the couch in the living room. "Can I do something for you?" Hiroki's mother asked as she exited the kitchen, looking very elegant. The boy also saw his father, also dressed elegantly, in a vest and cravat. Jeremy wrung his hands together while thinking of something intelligent to say. "Can I do something for you?" she repeated with a large smile. "Mommy, Mommy!" Hiroki cried, jumping to hug her neck. "Are you okay?" "I'm doing very well. Can I do something for you?" Jeremy and Odd timidly greeted Mr. Ishiyama, who responded with a wan smile, eyes vague. "If you don't need anything, I'm going back to the kitchen," Yumi's mother announced in a monotone voice. The boys found themselves alone in the living room, perplexed. "I didn't lie," Hiroki said. "There really was a monster." "I don't doubt that," Jeremy responded, suspicious. "In fact, haven't you noticed anything strange?" His companions shook their heads. Then he explained. "Hiroki, it seems that your parents didn't recognize you, and they didn't even ask us for news about Yumi." "As if they were completely confused," the boy nodded. "They're the same symptoms my father had," Odd sighed. "Memory loss and saying strange things." "Let's go have a look around," Hiroki proposed. "In the state my parents are in, they won't even notice." They climbed the stairs and entered the parents' room. The bed was made, the floor clean and shiny. They observed the smallest corners, even under the bed, not a speck of dust or muddy footprints. The young boys quickly inspected Yumi and Hiroki's rooms, but in both of them, everything was still where it had been. "Let's take a look at the garden," Odd proposed. They said goodbye to Mr. and Mrs. Ishiyama, then left. Kiwi followed them, reeling. "Hiroki," Jeremy asked, "try to tell me everything you know about this man who looked like a monster in precise detail." Hiroki closed his eyes to concentrate better, then detailed the tall silhouette he had seen in a dark coat and gloves with cables on them. "Kiwi barked," he recounted. "Then he fell asleep all of a sudden. The man must have used a sleeping pill." "He must have been prepared to come to the house," Odd added. Suddenly, Kiwi's growls stopped them. The dog sniffed the grass in the garden and growled, scared. The young boys approached and saw a shoe print, deeply rooted in the soil. It was undoubtedly a large shoe with a thick sole. Then, to the side, troubling canine paw prints.